Hello there. Today we are going to talk about Unreal's water system. It's a fairly complex and well-made system which provides us with all the water bodies like the ocean, the lake, rivers, etc. But it's still experimental and there are some limitations to it. So it's not advised to use it for production. So we'll talk about all the water bodies, the fluid simulation like ripple, foam, and the limitation it has, and some of the workarounds that we have. We'll use this small island as our example. This is created in Gaea, and with a little know-how, you can create your own island. So first thing first, water is a plugin and we need to enable it. We'll go in the settings right here, and then under plugins, we will search for water. Now there is the water, and the plugin is also showing that it's experimental. So we'll take this. Now if you haven't taken it already, then it will ask you to restart. So simply restart it and you'll get all the water functions. Now, once you have enabled the plugin, we'll go into the content browser, and here under settings, make sure you have ticked the show engine content and show plugin content. So what this will do is, let me contract this. So here, it will show us the engine content, and if we expand it, it will show us the plugin content. Now under the plugin content, if we scroll down, there will be this folder water content. Now this has everything we need for the water system, but we'll use the create button right here to spawn all our water bodies. So if you click this and go to all classes and simply type water on your keyboard. So WATER. Now here we have a bunch of stuff. The water body custom, the water body island, lake, ocean, river, brush manager and all that stuff. So let's start from scratch. We'll go to a new level and click the empty open world and create. Now first let's bring in the lighting and stuff. So for that we'll go to window and click environment light mixer. Now we'll click create skylight, atmosphere light, sky atmosphere, volumetric cloud and height fog. Now here everything is created. So we'll put all of them under one folder. So let's call it light and post and select everything and put it under the folder. Now come the first limitation of the water system, which is it needs a landscape to function. So you can't have it without the landscape. We'll learn how we can work around this later, but you need landscape for the water to function. Most tools in Unreal depend on landscape, so we'll bring in the landscape. So we'll go to select mode and click landscape. Now here is one of the frequently asked questions that you don't have these layers. So you can see all these layers, the ground, moss, rock, soil and all this stuff, but you don't have it because you have not set the layers inside the material. I'll talk about it towards the end and maybe put the material in the description. So for now, let's assume you have a material and you have all the layers set up. Now either you can import your height map from right here or just create a simple landscape. So first, to explain some things, we'll start with a simple landscape, then we'll build our island. Now another thing you need to enable for water to work is to enable the edit layer. You need to tick this right here. I'll explain why we need this once our landscape is created. And then we can choose our scale and stuff. Let's only increase the number of components so the map is a bit bigger and create the world. Now it's created, so we'll go to paint and create a layer info for this one. I already have so many layers info created, so I'll use one of the existing ones. Once you have created this, for the first material it will automatically apply the textures, and if it is not applied and you see black right here, then you'll right click this and click fill layer. Then it will fill the landscape with that layer. Now let's come to why we needed to tick that enable edit layers. So we'll go to the normal mode. So we'll click here and go to select. And once we have our landscape selected, under details, if you already have a landscape created, then you can enable the edit layers from right here. So under details, you will search for enable edit layers. So here it is. So we are making sure that this is ticked on. And by the way, if you don't have this detail tabs or any of these tabs, then you'll go to the window tab and you have everything you need from right here. And you can even have multiple tabs. You can dock it anywhere. Now we already have this detail tab. Also, when you are creating landscape and if you want to change your scale later on, remember when we were scaling our height map to our landscape in Gaea? So if you have already created your landscape but you forgot to scale, then you can also scale it directly from right here. Now let's go to the enable edit layers. So we'll go to select and landscape. If you take a look at right here, the edit layer. Now here this is layer 1. So this is the bottom layer, and you can right click and create another layer and maybe another layer. So what these layers allow you to do is you can do specific stuff in each layer. Let's go to sculpt and maybe decrease the brush size. And while we have the layer 1 selected, if we sculpt it, now this sculpting is done in the layer 1, which means if we hide the layer, then our landscape is back to normal. So if you're doing manual sculpting or painting, then you want to have multiple layers so that if you mess things up in some later stage, you can go back to that layer or maybe delete that layer or reset that layer. And while resetting, you will right click and clear. So you can clear the sculpting and painting. Now we haven't painted anything. Otherwise there would also be an option to clear the paint, or you can clear everything. So it's useful. And what water will use it to do is water will change our height map. It will affect the shape of our landscape. So to make sure that we can go back to our original landscape, it will create its own layer called water and make all the changes in there. So later if you want to undo this, then you can simply delete that layer and it will go back to normal. So let's delete these layers for now. So we'll right click and delete. Yes. Delete. Yes. And go back to select. Now we'll come to the outliner. And the first thing that we'll bring in is the ocean. Now I want you to keep your eye right here and see what happens when we spawn the ocean. So we'll go to the create button and under all classes we'll search for water. And there is our water body ocean. Now keep your eye there, and once we click it, you'll see that there are three things spawned. The water body ocean, which we wanted, and two extra things like the water zone and the landscape water brush manager. Let's delete this height fog. It's very annoying. Okay, we'll talk about what each of these does. First, I'll show you that extra layer water created. So if we go to landscape, and there it is, the water layer. Changes will be in this layer that we can delete later. Now the first is water body ocean. So let's align it with our landscape. So we'll select the landscape and send it to the location 000. You can type 000 here or click this button right here, which will reset it. Now one limitation with water system is it only works with smaller landscape. It starts to have problem with larger landscape, and it also starts to have problem when we go further from the origin. So we'll bring our landscape to the origin. If you look at our landscape, this corner is at origin. We want our landscape's midpoint to the origin, so the water is closest to the origin at all times. So the landscape was 1009 meter by 1009 meter. So here we'll do half of 1009 meter. So 1009, one unreal unit is equal to 1 centimeter. So we'll put two extra zeros to convert it to centimeter, divide it by 2 and add a minus sign. I will copy this and paste this same here. Now the midpoint of the landscape is exactly at origin, and maybe let's phrase it about 200 meter from the origin. So I'll put 200 meter into centimeter. Now we'll take our water body ocean and again bring it back to origin by clicking this, and look at that, there is our water. Now we'll adjust the height of the water. So we'll take this and take it up in the Z. Maybe not that much. So bring it down. So something like this. So now there we have our landscape, and the water system is affecting our height map, which means it's changing the shape of our landscape. So if we take a look right here below the water, you can see that the shape is changed right here. And with the water system, it actually spawned the water mesh. And if we go below the water mesh, there is a post process applied. Now we can change our water shader as well as the underwater post process material. Under the water body ocean, if we go to details, move down a bit, right here. Under rendering, you have the water material and you have the underwater brush process material. Now if you don't like the shader, modify the existing water material. So if we click this button right here, it will take us to where this asset is in the content browser. Now this is under engine, plugin and water content. Now this is what we discussed earlier. Now here's a little tip for you. If you are changing anything in a plugin or anything in the engine content, now first you make a copy of this and change that copy. You don't want to change this, otherwise it will change across all the projects. So whenever you start a new project in Unreal Engine, then that will be changed for all the projects. So you don't want to do that, otherwise if you mess things up, then there is no going back. Now I have already copied this material right here. So you can see this MI water material ocean. We'll rename this and add underscore user at the end. So it's easier to distinguish from the water content material and that we created this material and it's not created by Unreal. So we'll put this material right here. Now if we double click this, there are a whole bunch of parameters. You can change anything and don't have to worry about messing things up, because if you mess anything, then you simply delete this and make another copy of this. Now the same goes for the underwater post process. Now let's get back to our ocean. So this water body ocean actor right here is the spline you see right here. So if you click any of the spline points, then you can move this and the shape of the ocean will change. So the spline is what defines where the ocean is. So if you change the shape of the spline, then it will change the shape of the ocean itself. Now with spline you can choose any of the existing points and move it around. And one thing to note is that it won't move along the Z axis. So you are free to move it everywhere and it will not change the Z direction. Now in this spline, if you want to add another spline object, so you'll go to anywhere on the spline. So let's say I want to add a point right here on the spline. So right click and click add point here. So we have added another spline point. Now to add this, we can also duplicate this. We right click and click duplicate spline point and it created this duplicate point and we can move that point around. And a shortcut for this is if you hold Alt and drag this around, it will create a new point. Hold Alt, drag, new point, and you can move the new point around. And with any of these spline points selected, if you right click, then you get properties for this spline point. Now under select spline point, you can choose to select all the spline points or the previous spline point next, or you can add a spline point next to it or previous. And the next is the spline point type, which you can change from. Now you can choose between curve, linear, constant. And why would you want to do that? The answer is simple. So you see right here, this spline is weird like this, and it will take a lot of time adjusting this. So it's better you just right click spline point time and change to linear. And you can easily adjust all the spline points roughly. And finally, when you are done, you'll right click, select all the spline points, and again right click and change it to curve. Then you will have nice curves already made, which you can tweak a little bit to get more precision. Now this is the basics of how you can manipulate the spline. Now similar to ocean, we also have lake and rivers. So let's bring in a lake right here. Search for lake, and there is our lake. Let's bring it maybe in the center and bring it down maybe a little bit. And select the spline points and move them around. And same as the ocean, we can't move them in the Z direction. However, just like ocean, if we click anywhere and now lake, then this is the whole water body lake. We can move this up and down. So the height of all the spline points will be determined by this, and we can change the height for the individual spline points. We'll take care of all those overflowing issues later. Now most of the properties that we have under details are same for lake, ocean and river. So we'll take a look at one and it will be same for all of them. So let's move to the selected points. So remember all the properties that I talked about when we right click on this. Now we have all of these right here. So this is the select all spline points. So we have selected everything and select this spline point. Then we have the select next point, select the previous point, add next point and add a previous point. And then we have to additional select the last spline point and select the first spline point. And then we have the location, rotation, and the arrive and leave tangent, which are these two handles. So if you make change to this, you can see it updating right here. Let's select this spline point. And now under type, we have linear curve, all of them. So if you want to adjust it roughly, we'll select all of them, change them to linear, and later when everything is sorted out, we can change them back to curve to get smooth edges. And underwater we can change the properties, the velocity. We'll talk about the velocity in river, so we'll skip this. The next one is water body index, which is shown 1, and you can't change this. Now this one is used within the material, so you don't have to worry about it. Just know that it's a random number which is referenced inside the material to know which one is the lake and which one is the ocean. So since we spawned the ocean first, the ocean has index of 0 and the lake has index of 1. And when we later spawn the river, it will have index of 2. And the next one under advanced are the island and the exclusion volume. So we'll talk about the islands when we are creating the actual island. And the exclusion volume, I think it worked earlier in Unreal 4. There was a parameter in the water material called hole. So if we had a water exclusion volume, then we can turn on the hole from the material, but now that parameter is gone. Maybe if any of you knows what happened to it, you can comment down below. And to find that exclusion volume, we'll go right here and under all classes we'll search for water. Sure enough, there is the water body exclusion volume. Earlier you could just put it anywhere and it will create a hole after we turn the hole on in the water material. But you don't need to worry about the island and exclusion both. For the most parts, when we spawn the island or the exclusion volume, then it will automatically add it wherever needed. So let me show you a quick example. So maybe in the ocean we want to create an island. So we'll go to all classes, search for water, and then there is water body island. Now after we have created this island, we'll go to the ocean. And sure enough, under island, we have that island, no need to worry about it. Next are the terrain settings. Now all these terrain settings determine how our landscape is being affected. So first let's look at the ocean. Now here is the toggle for if we want to use the curve or not. And here is the actual curve that we are using. So notice the shape of the curve and then notice the shape the landscape is making. If you make any change right here, then you will see it being updated in real time. And as I said earlier, first we'll make a copy. So there is the float curve. This is a simple float curve. We can create our own or just simply copy this. Let's copy it here. Call it user. And let's put it right here. And now if you open this, now as we make changes to this, say right here, then you can see the changes being reflected in real time. So this is how the curves affect our landscape. And with the curve, we can offset the edge. So let's say the edge is right here. We can maybe have -4000 and then the edge will move further and further. And we can choose how deep it is and how wide it is. Okay, so I had to restart because of a weird bug. And let me tell you, there are going to be a lot of bugs with the water system. So the next is under wave, the wave attenuation water depth. So this one tells us how flat the waves are close to the shore. So you can see in the ocean there are waves and they are getting almost flat around the shore. This is because this is set to 2048. If we set it back to 0, then you'll see these waves around the shore and it looks horrendous. We don't want that. So we'll move it to a higher value. So 2048. And then they're getting flat real nicely. Next, we'll come under the wave source. This one defines all the settings for the waves. So in Unreal, we use Gerstner waves, and we have a Gerstner asset already created in the water plugin. If we move to it, then there is a Gerstner wave for the ocean, and then there is a Gerstner wave for the lake. Both are fundamentally the same, only the properties are changed. So if we open this, then we have a whole bunch of properties, and you can actually see it in the viewport how the waves are being affected. And by the way, I already opened it, so it's open like this. Otherwise, you'll have something like this. And then you'll go and open these one by one, which is tedious. So we have a shortcut for that. So if you have a bunch of children down the hierarchy, you can hold shift and then left click, and it will open all of them. If you do a simple left click, then it will open one by one. But if you do shift left click, then it will open everything. We'll not make any changes right here. So let me make a copy of it real quick. So actually, let's not make a copy. I'll show you how we can create our own asset. So you'll go to an empty area, and if you right click and go at the bottom under water, there is this water wave. So let's name it ocean wave user. So that's how we can create it. It's the same, and the default properties are used in the ocean. So let's go over these properties. So the wave source, we have the Gerstner water waves. We only have these in Unreal. So there's only one option right here. And then the same goes for the wave generator. Now under default, the first is number of waves. So the higher the number of waves we have, the more realistic it will look. So if we were to decrease this to maybe let's say 2. So now these are the waves that are being created, which may be good for a mobile game. So they use very low performance, and as the number of waves increases, the complexity also increases and performance takes a hit. And higher the number of waves, the better it will look. So if we go maybe 64, and you'll see these white things right here. Now it's more visible. This is because of double-sided geometry. Again, it's one of the limitations. So I'll go back to 16. And seed changes the random noise it is generated by. So we change the seed, then we'll have a different pattern of waves. And then there is also the randomness, how much random we want the noise to be. Now under wavelength, we can change the maximum and minimum wavelength. So it takes a bit of physics. So the wavelength is the distance between 2 points on a curve. So if we take a sine curve, then the distance between 2 points, if we increase the max wavelength, now the waves are going a lot more distance before they are getting flat. And then we also have a fall off with the wavelengths. So you can play around with these values to get different results. Next come the amplitude. So amplitude is how high or low it can go from a point. So if we increase the amplitude, then the waves will go higher and higher. And if we increase the minimum altitude, then the waves will go lower. And similar to wavelength, we also have a fall off for the amplitude. And the next two are the dominant wind angle and the direction angular speed. So the dominant wind angle is in which direction will most of the wave move towards. So basically like a wind. So if it is set to 0, then this is turned off, and we can have it follow a general direction. So if we set it to 45, let's set it to 0. So you can see all of the waves are moving in the same direction. We can change that direction, and the waves are moving in different direction. And the direction angular spread complements this. So when we set it to 0, then all the waves were moving in the same direction. And if we change it, then there will be a variance. So if we change it to be 10 or 20, so then you can see that most of the waves are still moving towards 180, but there is a variance, and some of the waves are moving in a bit different direction from 180. So the direction is decided by the dominant wind angle plus minus the direction angular spread. So we'll reset this. And the last one is the steepness. So here the smaller waves are more steep and the larger waves are less steep. And similar to amplitude and wavelength, we also have a fall off. So these are all the settings about the Gerstner waves. Now you can choose all of these settings in advance and use that asset here, or you can change the wave source from right here. And here we are seeing the asset reference, which means it will reference a asset. We can simply change it to Gerstner waves, and we can have all those settings right here and change all of these. Now these settings will be changed for this instance alone, which means that if we make any changes to this ocean, and then later if we decide to spawn another ocean, then that ocean will not have the same properties as these. Whereas when we are using an asset, we can have same properties over to the next ocean. Now these are all the properties for the ocean, and under lake we have all the same properties except these spline properties. So we'll talk about these spline properties with river. So our next water body is river. So we search for river, and river is again a spline. So we need to adjust the height first. So maybe something like this. And the first thing you need to see is where the river is moving. So the river is moving in this direction, so which means the orientation is right. So we can choose this spline point and attach it to the lake and have this final one and attach it to the ocean. And unlike the ocean and the lake, this time with the river we can move each spline point in the Z direction as well. So we'll move this down in Z so that it blends nicely. So something like this. We can add another point right here and maybe move it down further. And you'll see some of the water spilling right here. And now again to fix this, we'll offset our edge a little bit. So we'll search right here edge offset, and there is the edge offset. So sometimes it's not fixed by the edge offset. So we'll move the spline a little bit so that it's gone. Now it's mostly gone. So we'll have to adjust some things from time to time. So now you'll see that all our water bodies are automatically blended. So we only put a river right here, but you can see that these two are blending nicely. And again at the ocean, these are again blending nicely. Maybe not that nice, we'll fix this, but they are blending real nice. So with river, if we go down to the materials, so we have two additional materials in the transition, the river to lake transition material and the river to ocean transition material, which is what is applied right here. So this is how the materials are blending, and we'll talk about how the actual water is blending in a little bit after we fix this one right here. So this one looks a bit odd because this water is moving a lot and this water is not moving at all. So to fix this, we'll slow down the river. So another good thing about river is if we select individual points and go to the spline point properties, we can change the velocity of each spline point differently. So you'll see right here, all of these are 128 by default, so all of them are moving at the same speed. If we change the velocity to let's say 0, then you'll see this water is not moving at all. And you'll see this water is moving and this water is moving. So only the velocity of the water at that point is stopped. So this gives us a better control. So we'll not use it right here. We'll use it to stop the water right here. So first we'll make a spline point right here. So now this one is moving at 128 and let's change this velocity to 0. And now you'll see the water is slowing down from 128 to 0 at this point. So with each spline point we get the depth. Let me show you what it actually does. So we'll select this point, and if we increase the depth, then the river will be deeper at this point. 2000 is a bit much, but we'll see the effect. And we can even change the river width for this point. So if we change it to 4000, then river will be wide only at this spline point. Now these are the three water bodies that we have, and the another one we talked about is the island. Let me show you quickly what that does. So we search for island. Then if you are in the ocean or the lake, then we can create sort of a smaller island right here. And similar to what we have done till now, we can change the spline points and such. And this island is automatically added in the ocean. So we can have multiple islands like this, and we'll take a look at those when we are creating the island. So now let's talk about the another reason this water is blending nicely. The first one was because of the material between the river and the ocean transition. And the second one is all of these water is actually a single mesh. So if you go right here and turn on the wireframe mode, then you can see all of this water right here. So this is a single mesh. So this is the same mesh which is used in the river, the lake and the ocean. So all of this being a single mesh and some of the material magic, and we have a well blended water. And another interesting thing about the water is this actually looks like it's transparent. We can see the ground below it, but the water actually is opaque. So it's giving us an illusion that it is translucent, but what actually happening is it's rendering the water in a separate pass. First the landscape is rendered, then the water is rendered in a separate pass, and then those two are blended right here. So this one right here actually is blending half of the landscape and half of the water material. So that's why it looks translucent while it's actually opaque. So the landscape is visible at all times and rendered even though it's below the water. And to show it even better, first let's bring in a cube right here. If we apply an actual translucent material to this cube, then we'll see the actual effect happening. Let me go back to the content browser. So we'll create a material real quick, and under blend mode, this is opaque, we'll change it to translucent. And let's give it maybe a red color and opacity of 0.5 maybe. Now this is an actual translucent material. Now if we apply it to the cube, so this is a translucent cube. If we move it inside the water, then if it was a normal water material, then it should be visible. But if you drop it down, you'll see that the cube actually disappears. So you can see that this is not actually translucent. So there is also the limitation of using the translucent materials with this, but having it opaque gives us better shading and saves us some performance. And speaking of performance, if we go back to the water mesh, so you'll see this blue one is the water mesh, and if we move back, then the quads are automatically adjusted. So it's just like nanite, it can automatically adjust the LODs. So when we move further and further away, then there are less and less quads. This also saves us some performance, and also the fact that it's not actually a high-res mesh, and these are all the instance quads everywhere. Now let's talk about the other two things which were spawned when we spawned the ocean earlier, which is the water zone and the water brush manager. So this water surface right here is not the water body ocean, it's actually the water zone. So the water zone is spawning all of this water, the ocean, lake and the river. All of these are spawned, and that actual mesh is this water zone. So if we hide this, then the water is hidden. So what this ocean does is, if we hide this, spline is making all those height map changes. So it's essentially telling that this is where the water should be. This is telling the water brush manager. So the water brush manager handles all the details. So these water bodies actually define the area where the water should be. Then they tell the water brush manager, and the water brush manager collects all the information and then finally tells this is where you have to spawn the water, and water zone spawns the water. And one another thing is, so when you look at the ocean, it looks like an endless ocean, but it's not actually the endless ocean. And if we move further away, so it should be visible somewhere around here. It's blended really well. So let's open the island map. Okay, so here we can see it clearly. So this is where the actual high-res water mesh is. You can see this box right here. So this is where the mesh is. And this is the endless water mesh. So it's actually a low-res version of the same mesh. So if we go to wireframe, then you can see it's a low-res mesh. So it's not taking much of resources, but it looks better from the distance. So this is the actual island. Now since this video is getting long, we'll create this island in the next video. So I'll give you a quick run through for now, and you can create this island with everything I taught today. So you can think of it as your homework for now. Here I took the water body ocean, and you can see all these spline points. I adjusted these manually. So to do it quickly, first choose all these spline nodes and change them to linear. And then quickly add maybe 10 to 20 spline points around the island and refine those and maybe add 20 more. Finally, when you have adjusted everything, and then you can change it back to curve to give it a smoother fall off. And other than those, we also have all these islands. This is again the water body island. You adjust the height and choose the spline points, and then there will be this island. So the reason I'm not covering the island in this video is because I also want to cover some of the texturing part of this one, so that it's a little bit easier to place the water bodies where we want. And to give you a bit of hint for the texturing part, we discussed the texturing a bit in the 100 km square video, so you can check that out to see how we did the texturing. To show you where the layers are, we'll search for the landscape, and this is the landscape material. And by the way, this is a custom made material, so all these parameters are already defined in its parent material. So we'll search for debug and tick this use layer debug. and now all the layers will have a different color. So let me show you another map. So this is the landscape, and I haven't done any of the water on this one. So I'll give you a quick idea of how to do it. So since this one doesn't have an ocean, it only has the lake and the rivers. We'll go to the material and take the layer debug. So now you'll see all the layers will have different color. To make it easier, I put the river as the blue color. So you'll do something like this, and then you'll see this is where the river should be. Then you'll take the river and have the spline follow this exact path. Then you'll have the same river that you see in Gaea into Unreal Engine, and you have even final control with the spline tool now. As for this material, I'll put a simpler version of this into the description, so you'll see how the layers are set up. I won't use any of the textures, so it's smaller in size. Then you can add your own textures from Megascans to it. That's all about this video, and in the next video we'll cover the island.